There is a single number that quietly flips a switch in your financial life. Cross it, and something strange starts to happen. Your money begins to earn more in a year than you can save in a year. Stay below it, and you feel like you are pushing a boulder uphill, paycheck after paycheck, year after year, wondering why you never seem to get ahead. Cross it, and the boulder starts rolling on its own downhill with you walking calmly beside it. That number is not $1 million. It is not some impossible fortune reserved for people who sold a company or got lucky with an inheritance. The number is $250,000. And because I promised it to you on the thumbnail, let me say it plainly in the first few seconds. So, you know this is not clickbait. Once you have roughly $250,000 invested and working for you, you may never need to save another dollar for retirement again. The math can take it from there all by itself. That idea has a name. It is called the Coast Fire Effect. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why that one threshold changes everything, where the math comes from, and how an ordinary person earning an ordinary salary can realistically get there. If we have not met yet, this is Common Sense Capital, the channel where we take the money ideas that sound too good to be true, and we check them against the real numbers, calmly and honestly, with no hype. Sometimes the idea falls apart under the math. This one, as you are about to see, mostly holds up, and that is what makes it so powerful. And keep one thing in the back of your mind, because I am going to come back to it near the end. There is a specific moment, a specific birthday really, where stopping your investing entirely can still leave you richer at retirement than someone who keeps saving but started just 10 years later. It sounds impossible. It is not. We will get there. So let us start with the engine that makes all of this work. The engine is compounding, and almost everybody nods along when they hear that word, but almost nobody truly feels what it does. So let me give you the simplest tool in all of finance for seeing it. It is called the Rule of 72. The idea is centuries old, written down as far back as the 1400s, and it works like this. Take the number 72, divide it by your yearly return, and the answer is roughly how many years it takes your money to double. So if your investments grow at about 7% a year after inflation, which we will talk about in a moment, you divide 72 by 7 and you get a little over 10. In other words, your money doubles about every 10 years without you adding a single dollar. Now watch what that does to our magic number. Say you have $250,000 invested at age 35 and you never add another cent. 10 years later, around age 45, it has doubled to $500,000. Another 10 years, around age 55, it doubles again to $1 million. And by around age 65, it doubles one more time to roughly $2 million, from $250,000 to $2 million without a single new contribution, just by leaving it alone and letting time do the work. This is exactly what the late Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's longtime partner, was pointing at with one of the most famous lines in investing at a Berkshire Hathaway shareholder meeting back in the late 1990s. He said, and I'm quoting him directly, "The first $100,000 is a beast, but you gotta do it. After that," he said, "you can ease off the gas a little bit." People love to repeat that quote, but they miss why it is true. The first chunk is brutal because almost all of the growth comes from your own sweat, your own savings. But as the pile grows, the growth starts coming from the money itself. The financial writers at Investopedia described the tipping point perfectly. They said the magic starts when your money begins doubling every 7 to 10 years instead of crawling forward dollar by dollar. The real threshold, they wrote, is the point where your investment returns consistently beat your monthly savings rate. That is the moment your money quietly gets a second job, and it never calls in sick and it never asks for a raise. Let me make that second job idea impossible to forget. Imagine two workers standing side by side. The first one earns every dollar with his hands, and the day he stops working, the money stops. The second worker never sleeps, never eats, never complains, and quietly shows up every single day for the rest of your life, earning for you in the background. That second worker is your invested money. And here's the strange truth: almost nobody is taught. Below a certain amount, that second worker is basically a part-timer, barely chipping in. But once the pile is big enough, that silent worker out-earns the human one. From that day forward, the most productive employee you will ever have is a number sitting quietly in an index fund. And I want you to feel just how lopsided the back half of that growth is, because this is the part that breaks people's intuition. When your $250,000 doubles to $500,000, that single doubling added $250,000. When $500,000 doubles to $1 million, that one step added a full $500,000. And when $1 million becomes $2 million, a single decade quietly handed you another $1 million, more than most people manage to save across an entire working lifetime. And you did it by doing absolutely nothing. The last doubling is always larger than every dollar you ever contributed by hand. That is why the early effort feels so unfair and the later growth feels almost magical. It is the same engine, just much further down the track. Which brings us to the obvious question: why $250,000? Why that number and not 100,000 or 500,000? Hold that thought, because the answer is the entire heart of this video, and it depends on a second idea that the financial independence community figured out, and it is the part that turns a pile of money into an actual finish line. Let me set it up. For decades, the biggest fear in personal finance was a simple one: how much do I actually need to never run out of money? It felt unknowable. And then in 1994, a financial advisor named William Bengen sat down with historical market data and tried to answer it with real numbers. He asked a very specific question. If someone retired and pulled money out every year, adjusting for inflation, what withdrawal rate would have survived even the worst stretches of history? His answer became one of the most quoted findings in all of finance. He found that withdrawing about 4% of your portfolio in the first year, then adjusting for inflation after that, survived basically every 30-year period he tested. A few years later, in 1998, 3 professors at Trinity University ran their own version of the analysis and reached a similar conclusion. That is why people today call it the 4% rule, or the Trinity study. Now, here's why that matters for our number, and this is the part I want you to really hold on to. If you can safely live on 4% of your portfolio, then flipping that around, you need a portfolio worth about 25 times your yearly spending. That is just the math of 4%. 1 divided by 4% is 25. So if you need $40,000 a year to live, your finish line, what the movement calls your full retirement number, is about $1 million. And now finally, the $250,000 puzzle clicks into place. This is the idea behind Coast FIRE. The term comes out of the broader FIRE movement, which stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. As the planning site Projection Lab and the writer Jim Dahl of White Coat Investor both describe it, Coast fire means saving enough early in life that you can completely stop making new contributions, and your existing investments will still grow on their own to fund a full retirement. You are not retired. You still work to cover today's bills, but you are done saving. You just coast while compounding finishes the job in the background. So watch how the two numbers meet. We said a doubling happens about every 10 years at 7%. If your full retirement number is $1 million at age 65, then walk it backwards. At 55, you would need about $500,000, and at 45, you would need about $250,000. There it is. For a huge number of ordinary people, somewhere in their 30s or 40s, with a fairly normal retirement goal, $250,000 invested is almost exactly the amount that will quietly grow into a full million by the time they stop working without one more dollar of saving. That is why this specific number changes everything. It is not the finish line. It is the moment the finish line becomes inevitable. Now, let me make this real with a story, because numbers on their own do not move anyone. Meet a woman we will call Sarah. Sarah spent her 20s and early 30s doing the hard, unglamorous work. She lived below her means. She invested steadily into a simple, low-cost index fund, and right around her 35th birthday, she crossed it. $250,000 invested, and then something happened that she did not expect. Sarah got tired, burned out at her job. She wanted to switch to lower paid work she actually enjoyed, work that covered her bills but left almost nothing extra to invest. The old Sarah would have panicked, but she ran the numbers, and here is what she found. Even if she never invested another single dollar, her $250,000, growing at about 7% after inflation, would become roughly $500,000 by 45, about $1 million by 55, and close to $2 million by 65. She had already done the hard part. She was free to coast. She did not have to retire. She just had to stop sacrificing. The pressure that had been crushing her for 15 years simply lifted. And here's the promise I made you at the start, the one that sounds impossible. Picture a second person, call him David, who did not get serious until age 45 and only then started investing aggressively. Sarah, who stopped contributing entirely at 35, can actually reach retirement with more money than David, who started fresh 10 years later. Even though David is still grinding and saving and Sarah is not, that is the whole secret of compounding in one sentence. Time in the market beats the size of your contributions. The early, boring $250,000 that Sarah let sit and grow is worth more than a decade of David's late, frantic effort. Starting early is not a little better. It is a different game entirely. Now, before I show you the honest risk, let me answer the question that is probably burning in your mind right now, because it is the most important one of all. This is all wonderful if you already have $250,000. But what if you have almost nothing? How does an ordinary person on an ordinary salary ever actually reach that first $250,000? Here is the honest answer, and it is more reachable than it looks. The first stretch is built almost entirely on two things: your savings rate and your time, not some genius stock pick. Picture someone investing a few $100s every month into a plain, low-cost index fund, the kind of total market fund that Jim Dahl of White Coat Investor and most evidence-based writers point people toward. At historical returns, steady contributions like that, left completely alone, tend to cross the $250,000 mark somewhere in the range of 15 to 20 years. Not overnight, but well within a single working career, and far sooner if two people in a household are doing it together. And notice the quiet trick hiding in there. In those early years, almost every dollar of growth comes from your own contributions, which is exactly why Munger called the first chunk a beast. But the entire goal is to push through that ugly, slow, thankless stretch as fast as you reasonably can. Because the moment you reach the threshold, the nature of the whole thing changes. Before the line, you carry the money. After the line, the money carries you. The faster you get across, the more years you hand to compounding. And remember, those late years are the ones that pay out in millions. Now, this is the part where most videos would just keep cheerleading. But this channel is called Common Sense Capital for a reason. So let me be honest with you about where this can go wrong, because the people who get hurt are the ones who hear only the good half. First, that 7% number is not a promise, it is a historical average. Since 1957, the broad American stock market has returned about 10% a year on average, according to Fidelity. But once you subtract inflation, the real spendable return has been closer to 7% over the long run, as Investopedia's analysis of the data shows. Some decades are far better, some are brutal. There have been 10-year stretches where the market went almost nowhere. The doublings are an average across history, not a schedule you can set your watch to. Second, the 4% rule is a guideline, not a law of physics. Even the researchers behind it stress that it requires planning and adjustment. Some more recent analyses argue that for people retiring into expensive markets, a slightly lower withdrawal rate, closer to 3 or 3.5%, may be safer. So treat your number as a strong estimate, not a guarantee. And third, here is the biggest landmine of all, and it ties directly back to Charlie Munger. He had another famous line. He said the first rule of compounding is to never interrupt it unnecessarily. The single most dangerous thing you can do after crossing your $250,000 threshold is to crack it open, to pull money out for a nicer car, or to panic during a market crash and sell. The entire coast fire effect depends on one quiet act of discipline, leaving the snowball alone so it can roll. The moment you interrupt it, you reset the clock and you lose the very thing that made the number magic. So let us come back to where we started and to that switch I told you about in the very first seconds. The reason $250,000 changes everything is not that it is a huge amount of money. By the standards of a comfortable retirement, it is not. It changes everything because of what it represents. Boss. It is the rough point where your money starts earning more than you can save, where compounding takes over from sweat, and where, thanks to the math of the 4% rule, an ordinary salary and an early start quietly turn into a full retirement you no longer have to chase. The wealthy have always understood this. They are not necessarily smarter than you. They simply learned earlier to respect two forces that feel boring right up until the moment they become unstoppable: time and patience. The hard part, the first stretch, is real, and I am not going to pretend it is easy, but on the other side of it is something genuinely close to freedom. Not the freedom to stop working, the freedom to stop worrying. If this gave you a clearer picture of what you are actually working toward, share it with someone who feels stuck on that uphill climb, because this is the kind of idea that can quietly change the entire shape of a person's life once they finally see it. And if you want more money ideas explained in plain English, with the honest math included and none of the hype, you know where to find us. This has been Common Sense Capital. Do the hard part early, then let time do the rest.